You're depressed and anxious. You need a medication. That's what one of my patients was told. And that's what they were given. We'll say his name is Todd. We'll say he's 15. We're changing all of this to protect his identity. Todd was a young guy who was feeling really anxious in the world and also felt really down, just dragging, like just really depressed. And he talked to a physician who, kind of went through the checklist and was like, yeah, you've got a combination of depression and anxiety. Here's a medication. Have a nice life. And, Todd and his parents ultimately reached out because they're like, it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right. Like he's not the depressed kind of person. Like we don't know what's going on. So I was like, let's check it out. So we did some basic lab work, and this time, like, I didn't do anything fancy. And you know what Todd had? Severe iron deficiency anemia. Because Todd is primarily a vegetarian, and the way he was eating was probably not optimal for his body. He hadn't gotten the nutrients that he needed, and he was iron deficient. Like, he had no iron in his body. Do you know what iron deficiency feels like? Iron deficiency feels a whole lot like depression because you're depleted, right? When you don't have enough iron, nothing in your body works. You feel tired. You feel draggy. You can't get through the day. Except it wasn't depression. It was iron deficiency. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is, like I've said before, like I have nothing against medications. If medications are helping someone, fantastic. Why is it that we're not looking for things like iron deficiency? Why is it that we don't, before we prescribe medications, we don't say, let's just check to see if you're anemic. We're not shooting rockets to the moon. We don't need to do fancy, but shouldn't we at least be checking for these things? The other thing that was really interesting about Todd was that he also had this thing called an auditory processing disorder. Because as I was talking to Todd, I'm like, tell me what's up in your world. Like, what happens? How do you feel? He's like, yeah, the world is just overwhelming to me. I'm like, okay, tell me more. He's like, yeah, when I'm at home, I'm fine. When I'm with a few of my friends, I'm fine. But then when I go to class and when I'm out and like when I go to parties, and I specifically asked him, so like when you go to parties, when you go to places that are really crowded, what happens? I can't handle it. It's just too much. I'm like, oh, why? It's too loud. I'm like, oh, have you always felt this way? Yeah, always. Oh, that's interesting. So if the environment is too loud, you start feeling anxious. He's like, yeah. I'm like, oh, you've got an auditory processing disorder. What's an auditory processing disorder? It's really simple. The brain basically spazzes out if there's too much sound coming into it at the same time, because the way the brain in Todd was wired to process information from sound happened to be not very efficient. So it's like your computer that you put too much load on, and all of a sudden you get that, scary screen where everything shuts down and your computer freezes and then crashes. I'm sure all of you have experienced it at some point. Doesn't happen so much now, but you've all had it. So Todd's brain was that computer that froze and then just had to reboot because it was overloaded, literally. And there's probably at least 5% of the population, 5% of you listening have this. It's very common. It's very, very common. It's just that we don't know how to look for it yet. And the most amazing part of this is all of this could be undone. Iron deficiency, obviously relatively easy to treat, right? You throw some iron into the body, you throw some vitamins into the body, help the person eat a little bit healthier, right? Boom, iron deficiency gone. Auditory processing disorders, there are amazing programs out there. If you type in just auditory processing, there's tons of information. There's actually a website called ILS, Integrative Listening Systems, I believe. I'll put a link in the captions, where you can actually go work with providers all over the country. And basically through a computer, you start listening to sounds, and those sounds actually start rewiring your brain. How cool is that? But that is what is amazing about today, that we have this ability. And I mean, the ability of diagnosing iron deficiency anemia is not rocket science. It's been there forever. But beyond that, we have these abilities. And The whole purpose of all these videos is for us to put this information out there and for us to start thinking differently. Because what if Todd had not been ultimately diagnosed with these things? What if we had not crossed paths and Todd had spent the rest of his life thinking, well, I'm just a depressed guy and I have an anxiety disorder, because now he had a name to give to, how he felt rather than an explanation. And he would have just been on medications for probably the rest of his life, just kind of thinking, well, this is what is. And you know what? Medications don't work very well if you're iron deficient. Medications can suppress your anxiety because of the auditory processing disorder, but they don't actually address why it is that you're feeling this way, right? So we need to start thinking differently. And again, if medications are helping someone, fantastic, great, take it. And God bless all of those psychiatrists and psychologists that are doing the work that they're doing. God bless them. It's important. It's necessary. I'm not saying that therapists are not needed. I'm not saying that psychiatrists are not needed. I'm saying that we also need to start expanding how we think about these things. Because chances are there are at least a handful, if not a lot of people that do have iron deficiency, that have zinc deficiency, that have other physiological imbalances and deficiencies that are looking as depression. And you've heard me talk about metabolic disorders showing up as depression, other things showing up as disorders. And we don't even think about these things. We don't even talk about them. And we need to, because that's how we transform lives. That's how we make a difference in people forever. Because you know what? Once you rewire the brain to process sound differently, it's a forever thing. You do the work for a few months, and for the rest of this person's life, their wiring is different. So how they experience the world is different, and their anxiety becomes less. And when people are taught how to eat according to what their bodies need, and if you need to take a little supplement, you take a little supplement. For the rest of your life, you can experience things differently. And that's the transformative power of all of this. And that's why I'm here sharing this with you, because we need to be thinking this way, and we need to get more of this information out there. So, thank God, Todd responded well and is doing well. And that's the coolest part of what I do, to be able to see these people just, sometimes within a month or two, all of a sudden be like, yeah, I feel so much better. I'm like, cool. Thank you for watching. This is Dr. K. You be well.